International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
The Algerian diplomacy chief Ahmed Attaf has affirmed that Algeria is committed to intensifying its efforts at all African bodies and at the UN Security Council to unify and raise the voice of Africa globally. Ahmed Attaf also said Africa's struggle for its liberation and status applies to the Palestinian cause, which Africa considers as a natural extension of the struggle of its peoples against colonization. And as UNRWA warned that only 6 out of the 22 health centers of Gaza are still functioning in the Gaza Strip on account of the relentless Israeli bombardments, at least 11 Palestinians have been killed in renewed airstrikes on the territory. And those were the major developments. Now the full news edition. I'm Asya Abukar. Good afternoon. The President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, has chaired a working session dedicated to the reactivation of the one-stop shop service. On April 20th, the head of state instructed the government to establish within 1 month the one-stop shop. It is primarily related to the exclusive act of investing, far from centralized or decentralized administrative management. It aims to facilitate investment and overcome difficulties and obstacles, particularly bureaucratic ones, hindering investors. The one-stop shop is legally authorized to initiate and monitor all investment-related operations. The Minister Delegate to the Minister of National Defense and Chief of Staff of the People's National Army, Army General Said Changriha, is on a working visit of inspection to the 2nd Military Region in Oran, a part of the follow-up of the second phase of the combat readiness programs for the year 2024-2025. More with Jamal Salmani.
The Army General held a meeting with the officers and personnel of the 2nd Military Region, during which he delivered a speech broadcast via video conference to all units, where he affirmed that the People's National Army, true to the legacy of the National Liberation Army, strives to fulfill its national duty and constitutional missions. This is ensured through a balanced defense system that combines combat readiness and professionalism with strong patriotic values and loyalty to the martyr's oath.
We are firmly convinced that as long as Algeria remains committed to upholding the pledge made to the martyrs, and as long as loyal patriots continue under the leadership of the President of the Republic, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and Minister of National Defense, to move forward with determination and steady steps on the path of a comprehensive national revival, Algeria will continue its economic progress and strategic advancement. Its enemies, like those throughout history, will persist in dragging the tales of failure and tasting the bitterness of defeat and the collapse of their vile schemes.
At the end of the meeting, the personnel of the 2nd Military Region expressed their concerns and affirmed their full readiness to fulfill their duties. During his visit, the Army General inaugurated the new headquarters of the Military Court of Appeal in Oran, a project aimed at reinforcing rights and improving appeal procedures.
The Minister of State in charge of Foreign Affairs, National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, has affirmed that Algeria is committed to intensifying its efforts at all African bodies and at the UN Security Council to unify and raise the voice of Africa globally. Masoud Sharfi.
In a statement made during the official ceremony celebrated Africa Day here in Algiers, Mr. Attaf emphasized that Algeria will keep defending Africa's interests, the aspiration of its states, and the expectations of its people.
Algeria is committed to continuing and intensifying its efforts at all African bodies and at the UN Security Council to unify and raise the voice of Africa globally and to defend Africa's interests, the aspirations of its states, and the expectations of its peoples. For the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, this commitment is not a political or strategic choice dictated by changing circumstances or short-term calculations, but it stems from a deep conviction rooted in Algeria's African identity and its historical African consciousness.
He also insisted that Algeria will never turn its back to its African identity in general and its Sahel-Saharan neighborhood in particular, emphasizing that it will never allow the security and stability of its soil or of its neighborhood to be threatened. Attaf further affirmed that Algeria is deeply committed to the sovereignty of its neighboring states, the integrity of their national territories, and the unity of their lands and peoples, just as it is to its own sovereignty, integrity, and unity, adding that it will always remain an ally, a defender, and a committed actor in any effort that addresses the challenges it and its African brothers face. Algeria highly welcomes the African Union's recent judicious decision to review the questions of bringing justice to Africa by addressing the consequences of colonialism. The minister affirmed that Africa is today demanding the criminalization of colonization, the official recognition of colonial crimes, as well as the compensations and the restitution of its looted property. The Algerian diplomacy chief said Africa Day is an opportunity to recall the origins of the unity project that brings Africans together, to reaffirm their steadfastness on the path traced by their predecessors who championed this project, and to explore the future prospects of this ambitious, promising and civilizational project. He said Africa has taken great strides along the path of liberation, unity and development since the launch of its unity project in the early 1960s. Ahmed Attaf said the battle for the liberation of the African continent is not yet over, as the question of Western Sahara remains unresolved in the full sight of the international community. Meanwhile, the Algerian diplomacy chief Ahmed Attaf said Africa's struggle for its liberation and status applies to the Palestinian cause, which Africa considers as a natural extension of the struggle of its people against colonization.
The same applies to the Palestinian cause, which our African continent has embraced, considering the Palestinian cause part and parcel of the continental fight for liberation and a natural extension of the struggle of African peoples against colonization, discrimination, and occupation, just as Africa was yesterday witnessing scenes of slavery and criminality in the cities of Soweto, Sharpeville, Leopoldville, Steve Gelma, Kharata. Today Gaza is a field of torture and genocide.
That was the statement of Ahmed Attaf with regard to the Palestinian struggle for liberation.
You still listen to Radio Algeria International, and the Secretary of State to the Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of African Affairs, Ms. Bakhta Salma Mansouri, said in Algeria that Africa Day was an opportunity to affirm that history does not forget and that justice is not a short-term demand but a collective right. Speaking at the opening ceremony of Africa Day organized by the African Group at the Palais de la Culture, Mufti Zakaria, Ms. Mansouri said that the celebration of this day was an opportunity to pay solemn tribute to the struggles of the African peoples against barbaric colonization and slavery, and against all forms of exploitation and discrimination, and to salute the sacrifices of the generations who paved the way for the unity and independence of the continent. In this context, she affirmed that Algeria, under the leadership of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, reaffirmed its full support for this emancipatory vision rooted in a history of common struggle for which Algeria has always been at the forefront and to which it remains deeply committed. She added that as leader of the African Union in the fight against terrorism and violent extremism, the President of the Republic continues to promote an integrated approach that rehabilitates human security and establishes a link between stability, development and justice as for the development of resilient and prosperous societies. And now the Speaker of the Council of the Nation, Azouz Nasri, has signed the Register of Condolences on behalf of the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, at the Vietnamese Embassy in Algiers following the death of the former President of Vietnam, Tran Duc Luong. In the message of condolence, the President reiterated his sincere condolences, showing Algeria's solidarity with the friendly country. He also expressed conviction that the Vietnamese people will be able to overcome these painful circumstances. And now the Ministry of Agriculture signed a cooperation agreement with its Cameroonian counterpart covering several areas of the sector. The agreement was signed as part of a 3-day working visit to Algeria paid by the Cameroonian Minister of Agriculture, Gabriel Barobi, who was received by his Algerian counterpart, Youssef Sharfa. During the meeting, the two parties examined the strategies adopted in their respective countries to develop the agricultural sector and boost food security. They also highlighted the potential and ways of strengthening cooperation and the exchange of expertise in various fields, including irrigation, seed production, and agricultural technologies, as well as intensifying trade, particularly through exports. The Algerian experience in agricultural sciences was also discussed. Still with agriculture, and the Minister of Agriculture, Rural Development and Fisheries, Youssef Sharfa, has stated in Algiers that the 23rd edition of the International Exhibition of Agriculture, Livestock and Agro-Industry, CIBSA Filaha, represents an important opportunity to exchange expertise and explore new export markets within a context marked by an unprecedented dynamic that the sector has experienced over the past 4 years. Mr. Sharfi has the details.
At the opening of the 23rd CIBSA Filaha exhibition, Mr. Sharfa highlighted the event as a platform to showcase growing interest in the country's agricultural sector, supported by recent reforms and investment incentives. The event, which is to last 4 days, brought together several Algerian ministers and foreign officials from Italy, Mauritania, Cameroon, Oman and Zimbabwe, alongside over 800 companies from 40 countries. Key sector featured included Saharan agriculture, date production, potato seeds, olive farming, industrial tomatoes, and aquaculture, areas vital to meeting local needs, boosting exports, and reducing imports. Innovation was a central theme, with a startup competition organized by Filaha Innov to promote agricultural productivity and African cooperation. The delegation also toured the Africa Food Exhibition, visited international stands, and reviewed projects like a powered milk initiative with Qatar's Baladna. The event will end with the holding of a study session and the awarding of an African Agricultural Innovation Prize.
To the Middle East now, as UNRWA warned that only 6 out of the 22 health centers of Gaza are still functioning in the Gaza Strip on account of the relentless Israeli bombardments. At least 11 Palestinians have been killed in renewed airstrikes on the territory. The news agency Wafa affirmed that several other people were wounded in the bombardments, which targeted the northern areas of Jabalia and Beit Lahia, as well as Khan Yunis in the southern part of the enclave. This came as Germany and Finland stressed the need to put an end to the sufferings and massacres taking place in Gaza, describing the situation as unacceptable. In statements made in Turku, Finland, following a meeting held between German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and the Finnish Prime Minister Petteri Orpo, stated that pressure should be exerted on the Israeli government so that humanitarian aid could reach the territory immediately. In a similar move, Sweden summoned the Israeli government to guarantee a safe and unhindered access to humanitarian aid, while recalling that the occupying authorities must fulfill its operations or obligations in conformity with the international humanitarian law. And in Sudan, at least 172 cholera-related deaths have been recorded in 1 week, marking a significant resurgence of the disease. The Federal Emergency Operations Center in Sudan has reported a sharp resurgence of cholera, with 2,729 cases and 172 deaths recorded in 1 week, with the state of Khartoum alone accounting for 90% of new infections. Sudanese Minister of Health Haitham Mohamed Ibrahim recently lamented a surge in cholera cases in the capital Khartoum. In a statement, he indicated that the recent rise in cholera cases has reached an average of 600 to 700 people per week over the past 4 weeks. He attributed the outbreak to deteriorating environmental conditions and limited access to safe drinking water, worsened by the growing number of residents returning to the region following the liberation of the state of Khartoum. Since April 2023, Sudan has been mired in one of the worst humanitarian crises to date due to the ongoing conflict between the government army and the rapid paramilitary support forces, which has facilitated the spread of various epidemics. And now Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro's coalition has won absolute majority in the National Assembly, snatching landslide victory, winning 256 of the 285 seats at stake. This was announced by the President of the National Assembly and head of the coalition's campaign, Jorge Rodriguez. The day after Sunday's elections, the Venezuelan President's Unified Socialist Party won 23 out of the 24 states. The official result has not yet been announced by the National Electoral Council. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International, and back to the country now. The National Higher School of Marine Science and Coastal Development has received a delegation from Nigeria's National Institute of Political and Strategic Studies, now on a visit to Algeria. Our reporter Miriam Barshi, who is on the spot, had the following.
Here in Algiers, the National Higher School of Marine Science and Coastal Development has received a delegation from Nigeria's National Institute of Political and Strategic Studies, now on a visit to Algeria. During conferences held under the theme Blue Economy and Sustainable Development, several speakers stressed notably the various steps taken by the country in establishing a national strategy of blue economy and monitoring sustainable development. The head of the Nigerian delegation, Mr. Suleiman Mohammed Kabir, held Algeria for providing the delegation with all the knowledge they needed on the blue economy.
We have no doubt in our mind that Algeria was a place to be. In fact, the National Institute purposely sent 2 study groups to come to Algeria because of our belief that Algeria has all that we need to learn concerning the blue economy and sustainable development. And we have not been disappointed since our arrival, because we have been made to have an array of informations and all the necessary data we need has been given to us. And we are continuing. We will be here for the next 1 week, and we hope that by the end of the exercise, we will have more than enough to enrich our report, which we will submit to the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria as part of our study on the blue economy and sustainable development.
The Nigerian delegation will be touring Algeria until June the 1st.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. That's it for our news bulletin. I invite you now to listen to our economic program, compiled and presented by Said Bouazi, to be followed by our health magazine, compiled and presented by Mohammed Khatil.
Hello and welcome to our weekly program devoted to Algerian economic news. First in the news, a memorandum of